have you all here, and it's a great privilege to have here some components of the industry sector, the companies that are developing artificial intelligence, and I will be very brief because I would like to give the floor to Alice Audino in order to introduce our topic of today, and then give the floor to Francesca Petronio, which is Chief Data Officer. She's Chief Data Officer in Expert System, a company that develop artificial intelligence systems in Europe and all over the world, I mean. And Lorenzo Luce, Forbes Under 30 in Italy and CEO of BigProfiles. And then I would like to give the floor at the end to Luca Bolognini, President of Italian Institute for Privacy. He can give us some inputs about artificial intelligence from a juridical perspective, and it's going to be very precious. We already know that. So I would like to thank you, Pasquale, to organizing that, to have organized that. And so I leave the floor to Alice Audino. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Francesco. Thank you, Pasquale. Good afternoon to everybody. I am starting this presentation with the sharing on my screen. If I can have a confirmation by you to see it, it is better. Okay, okay, this way. Okay. Can you see something?
We see.
Yeah, great. Okay, open. Okay, so yeah, here we are. So as Pasquale and Francesco anticipated, the theme of today, the main theme is the European Commission white paper on artificial intelligence that has been issued on February of this year by the Commission itself. And these white papers on AI focuses mainly its attention on the opportunity given by the artificial intelligence and its application in many different fields. The Commission considered that, in fact, Europe will be capable to become a global leader in innovation in the data economy, and also has started to see the artificial intelligence adoption as a benefit both for the European society and consequently also for the economy, and this at a different level and for different stakeholders such as citizens, private companies, but also the public institutions. So the Commission has tried to propose what is the so-called ecosystem, an ecosystem based on mainly on excellence and on trust, giving the opportunity to reasoning about how to accelerate the adoption of the AI in Europe from one side, and from the other side, how to be always compliant with the European legal framework, such as with the fundamental rights, the consumer rights, but also in order to ensure the legal certainty that will permit to companies and public institutions, but also individuals, to innovate using the artificial intelligence. Concerning the first ecosystem, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear.
Okay, thank you, because I heard an echo. Thank you. So concerning the first so-called ecosystem, the ecosystem of excellence, the main pillars of this ecosystem, stating on what the Commission has thought, can be built with the work with the member states, and we have an example of this work with a strategy on AI adopted in April 2018, but also with a coordinated plan of December 2018. And now the Commission is asking for our support with this white paper, but foremost with the public consultation that will follow this white paper, in order to be able to revise the coordinated plan that will be adopted at the end of this year. Another great pillar on this inside this ecosystem of excellence will be the focus, the capability to focus the efforts of the research and the innovation community in order to create a sort of center of excellence, combining both the national but also private investments. And in this direction, the Commission proposed the Digital Europe program, but also some actions for Horizon Europe as a part of the multi-annual financial framework 2021-2027. And the other great point are skills, since skills can be made more valuable in order to attract the best teachers, but also researchers, in order to for Europe to offer world-leading master programs in these topics, so in artificial intelligence. Another point of this ecosystem is the focus on small and medium enterprises and on startups, which are subjects more maybe which are subjects that have more difficulties to obtain the access to finance. And the Commission planned to make the funds available through the InvestEU program. And for example, in this first quarter of 2020, 100 million euros have been planned for innovative developments in artificial intelligence. The other two main points of this ecosystem are the opportunity, the capability to secure the access to data and also to computing infrastructure, since the development of AI is made possible thanks to data. And Europe want to promote responsible data management practices that have to be compliant with FAIR principle, which is the FAIR principle means findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And the Commission, in that sense, proposed more than 4 billion in the Digital Europe program to support digital infrastructures. Hand in hand, not for importance, obviously, the presence of the European Union in the international discussions, for example, in the high-level expert group, which are involved also non-European organizations and governmental observers. And also in the presence of Europe can be seen in the OECD ethical principle for AI, because Europe was involved also in this writing and thinking of principle in the G20, for example, or in the UNESCO, and also in the context of the WTO. And the other, I can stop a minute if you have some question, or if I haven't been clear enough till now. If there are some questions, I can stop a few minutes.
Let me add something for everyone. Is available the chat in order to have a discussion with us, an exchange of ideas, and you can always type there in order for us to see if there are questions from you, and in order for us to answer properly. Thank you.
Francesco, this is Pasquale. I just want to remind the people that joined later the workshop, the webinar. I want to thank them and remind them, as I did in the beginning, that we are recording this webinar. So by their participation, we assume that they consent to the recording. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So we can fall into the second ecosystem that the Commission has shared as thinking about in the European Commission white paper, which is the ecosystem of trust. So the need to create this ecosystem of trust is due to face the fear of both from individuals, but also from the companies, to lose the power to defend their rights, but also their safety. And this fear is due mainly to the legal uncertainty that is present now in concerning this topic, but also to the unintended effects that can be produced working with the machine that has a machine learning or an artificial intelligence system on them. And the Commission has tried to address these issues with dedicated investments and specific action, as I have already mentioned, for example, the coordinated plan of 2018 or the publication of guidelines on trustworthy AI of the high-level expert group. And more recently, the Commission has proposed an assessment list to made when an operator is using the AI system in order to verify if this assessment list can help to use the system with more trust. You can see here 7 key requirements identified. And this assessment list has been adopted by 350 companies. And in order to effectively verify the efficiency of this list, and in order to give the opportunity to companies to send back the feedback that will be taken into consideration by the high-level expert group that will finalize our work by June 2020. And the main problems that the Commission has to consider when thinking about these requirements and this legislation is the fact that since the AI will be capable to substitute always more human action, the decision will be more and more based on AI reasoning. Given that the system, we can understand well the issues at stake if we see this simple picture, which divide the process of an artificial intelligence system in 3 main stages, which are the input stage, the processing stage, and the output stage. And the issues in the first stage is the fact that in the first stage that can be the presence of bias, and the bias being processed by the machine risk to have a much larger effect. For example, we can think about cases of discrimination. And the other issue that we have to face is the so-called black box effect, given that the machine learns while operating. And this signifies that not all the actions are predictable effectively from the beginning. So this situation may traduce in the impossibility to know which was the reasoning behind the decision taken and whether the rules were respected or not. And this lack of clarity would conduct also to an impossibility to apply our liability systems as we are used to know them till now. And we also obstacles to obtain compensation towards people who have suffered an harm. And for this reason, the Commission, on one side, is proposing possible adjustments to the existing European framework, adapting it to the AI. But on the other side, is trying to adopt a new regulatory framework whose main characteristics are the flexibility, the precision, the effectiveness, the fact to be not excessively prescriptive, and is trying to adopt different approaches toward the AI application qualified as high risk. The Commission fixed the concept of high risk and defined it with thanks to two cumulative criteria, which are the sector and the manner of use. This because significant risks are more expected in some sectors, for example, the health or transport or energy sectors. And besides this great category of high risk system, actually other situations may present a high risk even if are not considered to be part of this category from the beginning. And for example, if we think about the recruitment process, or in the case of remote biometric identification. And for this high-risk system, the Commission has proposed to assess specific requirements that must be verified while working in these different stages you can easily read on the slide. And basing also the reasoning on the guidelines offered by the high-level expert group. And this requirement will be further specified by the Commission itself, and taking into account also the comments received by the public consultation, in order to guarantee a sufficient level of legal certainty. And this prior assessment could include also a voluntary labeling for no high-risk AI application based on a voluntary decision of the operator, in order from one side to present itself more trustworthy in the market, and on the other to subject also itself to this regulatory framework. And the Commission in this phase regarding this new regulatory framework has encountered two main issues regarding the enforcement, since the main question is how the obligation are to be distributed among the economic operators involved, but also the geographic scope of this legislative intervention, since it would be interesting to think how make it possible for also non-EU based operators to be, in order to enforce also the non-EU based operators. And so with this white paper and the accompanying report on the safety and liability framework, the Commission launched this broad consultation, which involves different member states at different levels, including the society, the industry, and also the academics, in order to supply the concrete proposal for a European approach to artificial intelligence. And this consultation will allow a comprehensive dialogue with the different concerned parties, and will inform also the Commission on the next step. So I can only suggest you to profit of the consultation. Will remain open until the 31st of May 2020. And now leave the stage to Francesco and to our guest.
Thank you very much, Alicia, for your precious contribution. Okay, just before giving the floor to our three speakers, I'd like to first introduce them. Lorenzo Luce is the BigProfiles CEO. BigProfiles is a startup in the field of artificial intelligence. And Francesca Petronio is the Chief Data Officer of Expert System, again involved in artificial intelligence and supporting other industries with their products. The point of view of two companies that are in two different chronological phases of their growth, it's paramount for us in order to understand what is their position, in order to understand what research can do for industry and in the field of innovation. So I would like to ask first to Lorenzo Luce, then to Francesca Petronio, what is the position of their companies about this, the white paper, and the position of Europe in the field of artificial intelligence. Then I leave the floor to Luca Bolognini, because at the point, the most relevant contribution to what has already been discussed and what will come after me should come from one of the most important experts in Italy in the field of data protection, who is also the author of the book Artificial Insanity, and he can give us some legal and innovation perspective to this debate. So I leave the floor to Lorenzo Luce. Thank you.
Thanks, Francesco. Hi, everybody. I am Lorenzo Luce, and thank you all for the invite to this webinar. So I am member of the high-level expert group of artificial intelligence of Italy for the Italian government and for the Ministry of Economic Development. So I am one of the policymakers for the Italian AI strategy. but I am also an Italian AI startup founder. So in my experience as an entrepreneur, I think that every form of regulation is itself a limit for economic and military supremacy of Europe. If we want to make a trustworthy AI, if we want to tame it and bound it with ethical and legislative boundaries, we must accept that we are rejecting our supremacy. Actually, we already rejected it with all our regulation and bureaucracy, and that's okay. It's a choice, but we don't have to tell us that we are working to preserve the EU technological leadership. We are actually renouncing supremacy for rights and ethics, and that's good. That's pretty good. As a startupper, I think that founding is great, financing is really, really great. But I think that in AI, deregulation is the way to go. As the paper says, as the white paper says, the European Union legislative framework already includes legislation such as the Race Equality Directive, the Directive on Equal Treatment in Employment and Occupation, the directives on equal treatment between men and women in relation to employment and access to goods and services, and a number of consumer protection rules, as well as rules on data protection and privacy protection, obviously the GDPR and other legislations. So my question is why we need more regulations and boundaries. We already have plenty of them, and AI just have to expect to respect those existing rules. That's what I think of building an ecosystem of trust. We already have it. Europe is an ecosystem of trust. And what we don't have is an ecosystem of excellence in technology, especially B2C technology and advanced technologies like AI. And the only way to achieve it is through deregulation. So you have to choose among the two of them, the ecosystem of trust and the ecosystem of regulation, the ecosystem of excellence. That's what I think. And we chose the ecosystem of trust, basically. We already chose the ecosystem of trust. So to make an example, in Italy, I can't fly any drone. If I want to make a unicorn company of autonomous food delivery with AI drones, I simply can't. There is no financing, no public funding. My business can't even start because of regulation. Another example is the GDPR. The GDPR is a real milestone for our rights, but we can think that it has no impact on the development of AI in Europe and even on our economic supremacy. So when the paper refers to a future regulatory framework for AI, I think that the best future regulatory framework for AI is no regulatory framework. The paper talks about a mandatory regulation for high-risk AI applications and a voluntary labeling for non-high-risk AI applications. But this framework would very quickly become a standard required by the procurement of any public administration and any large company. So it basically will become mandatory for any B2B AI technologies like mine, which are very important in Europe, the B2B technologies, as the paper itself points out. That said, I think that there will be right measures to establish an ecosystem of excellence in Europe, and that will be tough to coordinate the member states, mainly because each state has allocated totally different investments in AI, from the 1.5 billion of Germany to the 100 millions of Italy, for example. Moreover, I couldn't find references in the white paper to regulatory sandboxes that can be very useful, that can boost experimental AI application and mitigate the effects of over-regulations and legislations. Finally, in promoting the adoption of AI by the public sector, thinking about the Italian public sector, it first needs to be digitalized, and then we can think about adopting AI or making it adopt AI. Our country has been struggling with the problem of digitalization for many years, for 5 or 10 years, and now the situation is getting better thanks to the establishment of the Commissioner for Digitalization, at first Diego Piacentini and then Luca, with extraordinary powers directly depending on the Prime Minister himself, who can even charge the directors of public administrations who oppose digitalization for tax damage. And I think that this is really a best practice that should be spread across Europe, especially to the under-digitalized countries of the European Union. So we are talking about making the public sector adopt the AI, but very often in many countries, the AI is under-digitalized. So I think that we are going in the right direction, focusing on artificial intelligence at European level, and that we must build an ecosystem of excellence without over-regulating our future. And that's what I think of the white paper.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I mean, it's precious to have your opinion on that. And I would like to collect the opinion of Francesca Petronio too, in order
Sure.
to have a complete framework of the industry opinion. Thank you very much, Lorenzo.
A pleasure for me.
Hi, everybody. And thank you, Francesco, first of all, for inviting me and giving me the chance to share my thoughts representing expert system about this white paper. So I won't be so precise as Lorenzo was in analyzing the white paper. And my goal today is more to put on the table some elements of discussion. Okay, so I think that the white paper is providing a lot of insights. So we should stay here talking for hours. This is why I picked the ones I consider the most relevant one. So I would say that also the initiatives mentioned in the document are absolutely relevant and needed to foster our technological leadership. I have some concerns regarding the real ability of the European Union to act as one, as it is written in the white paper. I think the current health emergency has highlighted the big difficulties Europe has in finding and implementing common measures, even when discussing about critical topics such as health. Therefore, going beyond intentions, it is necessary to set real plans with a very concrete approach that can take into account the differences we have in different areas of the Union when talking about artificial intelligence development and applications. Having said that, another key point, in my opinion, is the involvement of the private sector that is expected to provide a necessary level of co-investment. I guess this is probably easy to do if the private sector is referred to big corporations, whilst it can represent a big challenge for small and medium organizations. There are a lot of companies in Europe that can bring a high value in terms of intellectual contribution and artificial intelligence solutions that run the risk to stay out of the game because investing on this project from the economic standpoint can be difficult. So I'm wondering if the big investments the white paper mentioned will be directed also in enabling small and medium-sized companies in participating to these ambitious projects. My last consideration, strictly related to the ecosystem of trust, is that if we want to build this ecosystem of trust and excellence, I mean, we have to be able to compete considering the current scenario, because rules of the play are very different in Europe and at the other side of the ocean. So when it comes to data protection and security measures required to guarantee this protection, I think it becomes difficult to understand how we can keep pace if regulations are stricter and requires investments in order to be compliant with the legal framework. So I would say that on these, I totally agree with Lorenzo that if regulations are too strict, it really becomes very difficult to win these the technological leadership we would like to achieve. And this is more or less my consideration on the white paper.
Thank you very much, Francesca. I would like to leave the floor to Luca Bolognini, which is the most relevant person that can give us his insight in order to answer to your opinions, especially regarding data protection and cybersecurity as a declination of data protection. So I leave the floor to the president of Italian Institute for Privacy, Luca Bolognini.
Thank you. I don't know if I'm the most relevant or the worst person in this case, just because my perspective is the juridical one, and I know that we should never put a lawyer inside the garage where innovation happens. So I think that Lorenzo will agree. Anyway, I fully understand Lorenzo's point of view, and I must say that sometimes I feel the same, but I disagree. What do I mean? I think that the direction that was enshrined.
Non spegnete mai il Bluetooth voi
yes, please.
non sta capendo come si fa.
If you can, Anna, if you can mute your mic, probably it is. Try again. Okay. Anyway, I think that the direction of the European Commission that was written inside that document, that white paper, and also I've read, of course, also all the other papers and works around it, and so also the, for instance, the report on safety of AI and IoT, and in these documents we can find something that is precious. We can find the understanding, in my opinion, by the European Commission that is needed also at the regulatory level, at the European level, and why not also as a cascade also at the national levels, in order to allow AI development, to allow innovation based on artificial intelligence. Why? Because as Lorenzo said, we have a lot of regulations. We have over-regulations in many different fields, and we are the countries of trust. Probably Lorenzo meant of over-trust. Too much regulation, too much law, too many laws, too many burdens in many fields. We are the Europe of fundamental fundamental rights. We are the Europe of the European Union of GDPR, of personal data protection, of privacy, of protection of private and family life, and of many other fundamental rights. And in order to innovate, in order to develop AI-driven solutions, we definitely need, in my opinion, to balance these rights and freedoms. We have to balance burdens. We have to give more certainty, legal certainty, to investors and to innovators. And how can you do this without a specific regulatory framework that somehow can allow, can free, can open the margin of maneuver to innovators? So why a special legislation focusing on AI and AI-driven technology and deployments can be useful? Just in order to balance, just in order to allow, to clarify what is allowed, to clarify possible derogations to specific regulations in other fields. So I think that a new regulation would serve as a key in order to enable sandboxes, why not? In order to clarify the perimeter of application of personal data protection and non-personal data protection legal frameworks, in order to clarify the boundaries of intellectual property, industrial property regulations, if applied in an environment that is the AI-driven environment. In that sense, I think that the intuition of the European Commission to move ahead and move towards a new specific, special regulation for AI can be successful. I want to use the GDPR as an example. The GDPR contains general principles. If you go through it, you know, in Article 5, you can find the general principles of the GDPR. But if you take the general principles, if you read the Article 5 of the GDPR, then you can find a lot of elements that are inconsistent with the innovation that is needed in an AI-driven context. So let us try to comply, to fully comply with the general principles enshrined into the GDPR. Let us try to interpret the checklist, the Article 5 of the GDPR as a checklist. Let us try to comply with that and with those requirements. It is almost impossible, just because they were written not thinking about the artificial intelligence development. So we can say that the GDPR is already something obsolete if we want to interpret and apply it fully, literally, narrowly. And the same, we can say the same for other regulations, but that is why a new regulation on AI could be useful, could be important. We definitely need something clearly stating the new perimeter, the new balancing between these fundamental rights. I mentioned the personal data protection framework just in order to leverage on that example that we all know very, very, very well. So I agree with this approach. I agree with the approach of the European Commission, and I do hope that the direction will be this way, will be a direction of more clarity, more certainty, legal certainty, and a direction of allowance at certain conditions, because I like the approach that the European Commission included in the white paper, the approach that is like the pharmaceuticals approach. The idea that for highly risky developments and deployments, a prior authorization and prior testing are needed, will be needed. This is something that worked, that demonstrated to work in the pharmaceuticals and in drugs field. And I think that the parallel can work, can really work, because just like a medicine, just like an active substance, we definitely need to test and to assess the possible impacts on rights and freedoms, on health even, of people before marketing a new risky, highly risky solution. So I like the idea that the new regulation, specific regulation, can allow, can open, can balance, can give certainty, but I agree also with the cautious approach of prior testing and prior authorization for more risky activities, AI-driven activities and deployments. Please mute your microphone if possible. Marta, I think that you have the mic on. So, in my opinion, okay, new regulation, it is okay in order to open, to allow, to balance, to better balance. In my opinion, in certain cases, it will be okay also to be stricter and to provide rules for prior testing and authorization. In other cases, it will be definitely useless. And so in those cases, sandboxes and many other possible ways will be preferable. I see in that white paper, I try to close now, but I see some lack of attention on the inseparable connection between AI and IoT. Yes, I know, I mentioned there is the report that is attached, that is an annex of the white paper, but I see that probably the white paper could focus more on the impacts, on the possible risks but also on the possible opportunities that are coming between by the merge between the AI technology and the IoT technology, because this will be our future. And so we have to consider more and more material and immaterial effects, material and immaterial also side effects, but impacts on individuals and on society, on economy, on persons in general, legal and natural persons. I see just a little bit of lack of this attention in that white paper. Finally, to conclude, a general remark that is it is not necessarily an issue, but that I see. I agree with a specific comment that I heard during these weeks after the publication of this white paper, that is that the European Commission is focusing probably too much on the ground level of AI-driven products and services in the market, probably we should insist on a legislative effort also at a higher level, not only focusing on the market, on the products, on the services that could be AI-driven, but I see a big issue that is an issue of AI-driven democracy. So this is not really addressed in that white paper. Probably that was not the sedes materiae, but it seems like the European Commission wanted not to talk and to analyze the artificial intelligence impacts on other aspects of our lives, also at the level of institutions. I'm talking about AI applied by public institutions, but even I'm talking about the possible AI-driven policies and political, even political activities and decisions. Think about a parliament that will use AI-driven tools in order to make decisions in the future. So let us focus also on these higher aspects that are not addressed, not at all, in the white paper. Let us think about the possible implications of AI if used in the institutions and in the public institutions environment, and even by rulers and regulators and legislators. Let us think about it. Thank you. I spoke a lot, but I wanted to share with you some points. Of course, there are many, many other points that could be relevant, but the time is tight. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. And so thank you very much to everyone. I leave the floor for the conclusion to Pasquale and Annicchino. And I would really like to thank you, every one of you, for having joined us, because it's very important for us to have your inputs. And so thank you again, and I leave the floor to Pasquale.
Thank you very much, first of all, to all our speakers. But besides, before leaving the floor for the conclusion, I think we can take 10 minutes to see if there are any questions for the speakers, if they agree, so that people can intervene or just write down the questions. So anybody who wants to intervene.
Yeah, Pasquale, if I can add something.
Yes.
We can share also the link that address to the public consultation. In this way, if people here would like to have a look, they can actively give their ideas
Yes.
on the public consultation. So we can share it, I think, on the chat, the common chat.
Yes.
And if you want, I can do it waiting for your question or other questions. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
No, I think it's, I mean, we have seen, of course, the different perspective and different kind of dialogues in which we are usually engaged, where, you know, when you are as a lawyer in a room with a bunch of engineers, of course, you always have to explain why you are there and why you don't want to prevent them from doing their job. And I think that what Luca stressed, the fact that law can be used not only to limitate, but also to create incentives to innovation, I think it's very important. And of course, this comes to the kind of legal development that we are seeking. The law can promote incentives by creating more trust in the digital solutions and so on. And of course, it's a matter for the legal design, this to be addressed. And I agree that the white paper has to be read with the report that Luca mentioned, and we are planning a specific webinar on that with Francesco and Alice, which we will announce soon, but also has to be read in conjunction with the data strategy. which is the also on the topic of a webinar that we have already had. And in the data strategy, for instance, proposal for a data act are made. And you know that there is also an ongoing review of the GDPR, and there is also possibility to provide feedback to the Commission, I think until June, if I'm not wrong. If there is any person involved in a project or pilots who wants to provide feedback on that, I think that's very good feedback that can come also from the research community to the GDPR as well. So there is several kind of feedbacks that the Commission is gathering now. I expect that this COVID crisis will shape further reflection on all these kind of topics we are currently addressing, basic IoT, artificial intelligence as an IoT enabler, if you want to look at it that way. And this is probably the perspective under which we are looking at AI from NGIoT perspective. Is AI an IoT enabler? To which extent? And what are the limitations of AI as an IoT enabler? So the kind of reflections that, wider reflections that Luca was kind of asking for, I think it's very much needed from all our side, with all the different kind of backgrounds that we have, whether from industry or from research. So I thank you very much. This webinar will be made available on the NGIoT website. We have already a new webinar scheduled, which is on April 10th with Antonio Kung, which has been also with us today from Trialog. And Antonio will, with all his experience in standardization on security and privacy, will present a webinar on IoT enablers, which is very relevant also from the work that we do for NGIoT. And for the final word, I leave the floor to Alice, actually, if Francesco agrees.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. I've shared the link to the public consultation. In this way, everybody can have the right access to it. I think it's really precious if everybody of us can take a time for thinking about it a bit more. Maybe due to little time we have now, it is not the right place to continue the discussion on, or also there are persons that prefer talking by themselves or on these issues, because I think they are also a bit, I don't know, particular issues. So I really invite all of you to have a look to the link. So this is my suggestion for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Alice will stop the recording and save the recording, which is very important for us. Perfect. And we thank you very much for your participation, and you will hear from us soon for next week webinar. And we hope to see you next week then.
Yeah.
Thank you. Alice, you are...
Okay, bye-bye.